You are listening to Proof of Love with Tatiana Moroz, Dr. Stephanie Murphy, and Lauren Kasovitz. This show may contain adult content, language, and humor and is intended for mature audiences. If that's not you, please stop listening. Nothing you hear on Proof of Love is intended as financial advice, legal advice, therapy, or really anything other than entertainment. Please take everything that you hear with a grain of salt. Oh, and if you're hearing us on an affiliate network, the ideas and views expressed on this show are not necessarily those of the network that you're listening on, or of any of the sponsors or affiliate products that you may hear about on the show. Now that that's squared away, let's start the show. Show me your heart. I know that it's beating. Tell me that you love me too. So I know your heart is true. 'Cause I need some proof of love. 'Cause I need some proof of love. 'Cause I need some proof of love. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Proof of Love. This is a show where you get connected with your feelings. You're forced to experience them, and hopefully you don't cry in front of people at your office because you're not supposed to be listening to the show. Anyway, you're supposed to be working. Get back to work. Stop trying to solve your problems with love on the internet.
Oh my God, that sounds horrible.
Listen, I got to give them a dose of reality every once in a while. They can't just come here to this show to get coddled. Sometimes rough love is tough love is what's needed.
Well, we're not into forcing anyone to do anything here on this show, but I think they like it. I think they like being asked to examine their feelings. How about that?
Well, we're gonna talk about feelings, and we're gonna talk about why sometimes it seems like there's not a lot of women involved in politics, and there's all sorts of things that we're gonna go over because we've got Carey Wedler on the show today. For those of you who aren't familiar with the show, this is Proof of Love. I'm Tatiana Moroz.
Hello, and I'm Dr. Stephanie Murphy.
Hi, I'm Lauren Kasovitz.
Normally we say a lot of things about ourselves, but by now you've probably already listened to the show, and you can check out our bios. But we've got Carey Wedler on the show, who I just saw give an awesome talk about why aren't there more women in liberty movement at Anarchapculo, which is down in Mexico. I'm still here in Acapulco. By the time you guys are listening to this, I might be back in the freezing icy cold. But Carey, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Oh, thank you for having me and taking an interest in this very complex topic.
Well, I think that, it's hard to sort of pinpoint why things are the way that they are. And, when people look at your videos, maybe you could tell people a little bit about your video history, because I've seen a lot of them and you're always really upbeat and sort of more of a fun version of an activist. But you also started out, lighting some things on fire. So can you give us a little bit of background for people who haven't seen your videos yet? And where's the YouTube channel where they can see them?
You can just type my name into YouTube. It's Carey Wedler, Carey Wedler. When I first made the channel, the username was Carey Elizabeth 824 because I had no intention of making videos. So that's the URL, which is not like my favorite thing to tell people, but that's how you can find me. I started making videos in 2011. I had been an Obama supporter in 2008. And in 2011, I heard the good word of Ron Paul, and it totally blew my mind, changed my perspectives. And I really just started making campaign videos for him, like Google Ron Paul, check out what he has to say, follow the Constitution. And after he got pushed out of the 2012 campaign and election, I lost faith in the system. I found my way to anarchism, hence why I'm speaking at a conference called Anarchapculo. You mentioned lighting things on fire. In 2014, I decided to blowtorch my Obama shirt because it was a real shirt. I had an Obama shirt. It said Obama's my homeboy because I thought he was. So I set that on fire. It went way more viral than I could have ever imagined. And that's honestly how I made a name for myself. Almost everything in my career has stemmed from that single video, which I never saw coming, but I've evolved past that. I don't think I'm going to light things on fire anymore, but we'll see what happens.
That's how it works, isn't it? You can't really predict what's going to go viral, but you have to just kind of roll with it when it does.
Yeah, I have a joke with my founder at Anti-Media where like the first rule of Viral Club is don't try to go viral. The second you try to go viral, you're not going to go viral.
Okay, I like it. I like learning about virality. I don't know if I've ever had a viral video, but I like the concept of that. And you guys have a lot of experience with that, all the different content that you've been making over the years, so with anti-media. But before we get to that, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to our sponsor, MetalPay. They make this show possible. So let me tell you a little bit about MetalPay. Payment apps don't usually pay you back, but with MetalPay, you can pay anyone, anytime for free, and you get rewards for sending and receiving money, up to 5% back. It's a fun and quick and easy way to get people into crypto. You can also buy and sell 16 different cryptocurrencies. You have an FDIC insured cash balance and cash out directly to your bank. And if you check out MetalPay, you can see how rewarding paying your friends can be by using the code Tatiana Show, all one word, lowercase, and you get $10 in free rewards just for trying it out. So if you use Tatiana Show, that code, you will get $10 and you can try out something that's better than Venmo and better than PayPal, I think. I don't know. It's looking pretty good to me so far. It's available on the iOS.
Great.
Thanks. It's available on the iOS App Store or at metalpay.com. So I was trying it out at Anarchapculo. There's some new features coming up on the horizon that I'm excited about, but people can try it out now and it's working and it looks really good. So anyway, thanks for the brief interlude. Let's talk
Carey.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so just to summarize what you were saying, Carey, it sounds like you've been involved in kind of a niche political movement for a while. And during that time, you've seen a lot of stuff and your views have kind of evolved and changed. And you've had the experience that I think anyone can relate to, even if they're not involved in some kind of niche political movement. It's a common experience where women in any kind of movement have certain things that they notice, right? Things that they start to notice if they stick around long enough. And that's a big if, because often they don't stick around to experience these things. And you're talking a little bit about why you think that is from your perspective, right?
Right. And there are a lot of layers to the speech I gave. And what I started with was a disclaimer of this is just my opinion. This is what I've observed. I'm not speaking for other women because we all have our own experiences, but it was nice to see that after I gave my speech, a lot of women came up to me and said that it really resonated. And it isn't just about problems within our community or any community, because it's definitely not limited to libertarians. I talked a lot about culture. Maybe we can get to that later. But as far as the community, yeah, I think a lot of women notice that I had some screenshots in my speech. And you mentioned maybe women don't stick around for very long. And one of the screenshots I shared was somebody commenting on a very popular anarcho-capitalist libertarian page. And he just says, not only are women weak, they're also stupid. And I tried to explain, okay, so if I'm this woman who's really skeptical of the political system, I know it's not working, I can sense something's wrong, I find this meme page, there's these memes that really make a lot of sense to me, and then I see those kinds of conversations in the comments, that's not really a place where I'm going to feel welcome, and I'm probably going to back away.
Oh, right. And I mean, they might say well, oh, Carey, we're not talking about you, obviously, because you found this page, so you're enlightened, right?
Yeah, right. You're one of the good ones.
But you don't know that. I mean, and it's a real turnoff when you hear something like that. Nobody wants to really be reading stuff that they're called stupid all the time, unless maybe they're a masochist or they have really low self-esteem. But I mean, most people would see that and say, okay, well, I guess they don't want me here, so maybe I'll just take off, right?
Right. And it's also hard to take the principles seriously if they're rooted in individualism, and then you see people who claim to believe in this collectivizing you.
Right. Yeah. And I think that we can generalize this more broadly than just sort of the libertarian community. I mean, this happens in the cryptocurrency world, which our show is kind of geared towards the cryptocurrency world. This happens in tech. This happens in finance. This happens in basically any space that gets to a critical mass where it's kind of there's kind of a gender imbalance, and there's a little bit more male dominated. It can become intimidating for women to stick around and it takes a little bit of bravery just to kind of stick around and check it out, because you're going to have experiences like this where you feel like, oh, maybe this is not for me. Maybe these people don't really accept me here or want me here. Or maybe you hear something overt, like a belief that at least this one person thinks that women are stupid or irrational or driven by emotions or something like that. And then nobody else is really saying, oh, I disagree with that. That's not true. They're just kind of tacitly accepting whatever this person said. And that's maybe a more extreme view than a lot of people hold, but at least like the majority of people, you get the sense, hold those beliefs kind of passively without questioning them. They would generally agree with the statement, yeah, women are more driven by emotions than men. And that's a bad thing. That's what follows that statement, right?
Right. And then I've also found that if there is a man who does stand up for women, they immediately just get berated for being white knights, and they get discounted as well. So it's like you can't win.
What is a white knight? For someone who doesn't know what that is, what is a white knight?
Oh, I would love to explain this from a blogger perspective.
Yeah.
A white knight is usually a man who steps up and defends somebody who's being attacked or verbally abused. Usually, at least in the blog space, it was if a female was being abused or attacked in any kind of way. I know abused maybe isn't the right word to use here, but just kind of maybe made fun of or teased is a better way. And they would just immediately come to their rescue with, no, she's not this, she's not that. And it's a really nice thing. And I think there are a lot of white knights who are actually really good guys who are really there to stand up. And then there's also kind of the idea that there are white knights who actually aren't really there to stand up for the person who is being teased or being made fun of. They're there to be the good guy. They're there to be
right. So what happens is a woman gets attacked or abused online, and I think abused is a fine word to use, Lauren.
Okay.
A woman gets attacked or abused online. A man jumps in and defends her somehow. And then usually another man comes in and says to the first man, you're being a white knight. And what that means is the second man says to the first man, you're just doing this to try to get a girlfriend. You're doing this to try to curry favor with her. You don't really believe this. You're just basically doing this to look like a good person.
Yes.
I like white knights, and I think people should stop shaming them, because even if they are being manipulative, it's better than the alternative of nobody doing anything to help us at all. Like, that doesn't seem like a good solution. I'll take
right. Sometimes it's nice when someone else picks up it's nice when someone else picks up the slack and defends you, right? Especially if it's an online argument where it seems like there's more comments in one direction. It's always good to have another person weigh in. But I mean, there's maybe a bigger issue even, which is that I think women on the internet are just, if you've ever had the experience, like the women who are listening to this are probably nodding their heads. They know exactly what we mean, but men on the internet may not know about this because they don't get this so much, especially if you put yourself out there publicly, and especially if you put yourself out there on video. You're just, as a woman on the internet, you're going to get all these comments about your appearance that you never asked for. Like all these opinions, people feel the need to say what they think of you, even if it's a really negative judgment, or maybe it's a positive judgment. Oh, she's hot, nice tits, or something like that. Nice boobs, or something like that. Or, oh, she's ugly, I don't like her nose. And then sometimes these comments can be really mean. And so sometimes women on the internet are just hiding their gender behind a screen name or something because they just don't want to deal with that crap.
Stephanie, it's so funny because for years, even before I was blogging and after I was blogging, people used to tell me all the time, like, you should get on video, you should try to do this, you should try to do that. And after my experience with blogging, which was 80% wonderful, I had a popular blog, it was great, but it was 20% horrendous. I was verbally attacked by more men and women than you can imagine because of the popularity of the blog and friends I had. I started using my real picture when I was hosting blog meetups, and there would be people having full arguments on other blog comment sections about whether they thought I was hot or not. It was so horrific and humiliating. And especially when you're in your 20s and you're just feeling so self-conscious about things and you're starting to age, there were so many things that were just so hurtful and cruel. And so when people started telling me a couple years back, you should start a YouTube channel, you should do your film reviews with video, blah, 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 immediately I flashed back to almost 10 years ago and just how it felt, even when somebody was giving me compliments, just how gross it felt to have people discussing the way I look when I'm writing pop culture reviews or talking about the TV show Lost. Who cares what I look like? I wasn't putting up bikini pics. I was a girl next door, you know?
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that usually, it's possible that men could get comments on their appearance, but it's far less likely that they're going to have to deal with this. Like for women, it's just kind of a given. Like if you put your appearance out there, people are going to comment on it and they're going to give a lot of opinions about it. And if you're a man, they're more likely to be talking about your ideas or what you're saying or something than your appearance, and especially critical comments.
It's so true. And it really takes away, if you have something important, significant, or even really insignificant to say, you just want to speak your mind. A lot of women, including myself in the past, just stop doing it with using your picture or video out of fear of those comments or having to defend yourself or hoping there would be somebody to come to your aid or just whatever the reason may be. It stopped a lot of people from doing things that they want to do. I think it's really disappointing. For me, it's really sad. I still think about YouTube channels all the time. For instance, when we were putting together our profile pictures for the site, I stressed so hard about what picture to use so that when people heard my opinions on relationships and dating and this and that they would look at a picture and be like, all right, well, she's cute enough. And that's the worst feeling. And that's terrible. Wow. I don't care what people think of me now. Like, I really don't. But when that happened just a couple weeks back, I realized I still did. And it's a shameful feeling to realize that even somebody who's really confident in who they are, what they look like, what they can do, just the general things, can still have those moments, and it can really affect things. I don't know how we change it. I really don't.
Yeah. And Carey, I noticed you were saying in your talk that you had kind of a similar experience with your YouTube videos, and you actually made them private because you were getting unwanted attention, and also you were reflecting on, you know, why were you kind of feeling this pressure to use your appearance to promote your videos, right? Talk about that a little bit.
Exactly. So when I first started making these Ron Paul videos, like, I am sorry, Ron Paul, I was wearing tank tops. I was like laying on my side. My boobs were hanging out, and I was 23. Like, I was pretty young. But it wasn't until a few years later, I looked back on those videos and I realized, like, oh my gosh, it wasn't conscious at the time, but I sincerely thought that it didn't, like, I needed to show my cleavage. I needed to be sexual for anybody to care what I have to say. And that made me really uncomfortable. And I hadn't really moved past feeling that way, but I knew that I wasn't cool with it. Like, I still had my insecurities. I still had this complex about being valued for sex appeal, but I knew, like, I don't think I want guys looking at this, you know? And
we get these really strong messages from the culture growing up, just like you talked about in your speech. We get these really strong messages that our value comes from our appearance and whether we're pleasing to people to look at, mostly men. And the men are setting the standard of what's pleasing to look at, right?
Right. And, you know, I didn't mention this in the talk because I'm speaking in front of a big group of people and a lot of them are men, but I have old pictures of myself. I'm not exaggerating, 9 or 10 years old. My sister and I, my older sister, we had a disposable camera. We had training bras and we were doing like mock Victoria's Secret photo shoots because we wanted to be sexy. We wanted to be hot. I mean, that is so young. Mm-hmm. And that didn't come from my mom. Like, my mom would always tell us, she'd be like, guys like you because you're smart, not because you're pretty. Like, she really tried to take the focus off of our appearance. So we weren't getting that from our nuclear family. We were getting that from the culture. And it's really sad. It makes me sad to think back on. And I have these pictures of myself when I was like 15, and we would have digital cameras and disposable cameras, and we would post them on a site called LiveJournal at that time, before selfie was a word. But we were looking for attention. We were looking for that validation. We thought that that's where our value came from. And granted, I'm from Los Angeles. I don't know if it's different for me because I come from such a superficial, warped city that it has a specific influence, but that was my experience, and it's just very sad.
I think it would just be a difference of degrees because those messages are everywhere in the culture. And of course, like, the irony is, even if you do use your appearance or your sex appeal to try to get attention and to get people to listen and pay attention to what you're saying, the irony is usually they're just focused on the appearance anyway. Even if they're looking at you, they're not really hearing what you're saying. And so how do you actually get heard as a woman is the big challenge, I think, that we all face. And we tried different strategies, but we quickly find that it's sometimes quite difficult.
I don't know. Maybe I would say that we need to hear ourselves through the noise. You know, one of the things that popped out to me about Carey's speech was that whole Hollywood culture and the Valley Girl culture. When I was little, I used to have an alter ego. I was Debbie from Hollywood.
That's my mom's name. That's too funny.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, and I really liked Madonna. And I wanted to be, I think I was hypersexualized at a very young age. Like, why was I thinking about those things at 11 or 12. I think that's a little bit young. So when I saw Brittany Spears come out and that basically all the music that happened after that, to me, I feel like it's a really, really unhealthy influence on little girls. So if you're telling them, oh, people want to hear you, I think that prism with which Carey felt like she had to go and put that video out in a tank top, like everybody's done that tank top video at some point, in some form or another. I don't know. I just wonder, how do we stop viewing ourselves in that way and separate it before we can even try and have anybody else hear the message? Because we're viewing ourselves in that way, on some level.
Yeah,
that's
totally.
a really great point, Tatiana. I'm glad you brought that up. Go ahead, Carey.
I was just going to say, and I talked about this in my speech, I think, and I can't speak for other people, I think what it came down to for me was a really intense lack of self-love. And that wasn't necessarily the culture. For me, it was like my parents got divorced. They had a really rocky marriage. And because of the experiences that are very personal to me, but I'm sure a lot of other people can relate to, I had a very fundamental feeling of I'm unlovable. I am not enough as I am. And then I saw the culture swoop in and it's like, well, here's how you can be valuable. Here's how you can be lovable. And I latched onto it so intensely thinking that could make me lovable. And of course it didn't, because I didn't love myself. And I didn't understand, well, maybe just innately I am lovable as a human being. I am deserving of love. That wasn't there. It wasn't modeled for me. And so for me, so much of this process of healing has been to just learn how to love myself, not even like in my physical form, just like my being, my soul, not even Carey Wedler, just like the spirit that's within me. And that's really hard to do. It's not modeled for us because we are always pulled away from ourselves. There's always this external influence of all these voices and all these messages of what we're supposed to be. There's very little room to hear ourselves.
Yeah, man. I like it. How do you love yourself though, right? People talk about self-love all the time. And so for me, part of that journey was simple stuff like taking a bath and dry brushing and meditating or going to sleep when I needed to. But I think that that's only one facet of it, and that's an easy thing to do. But when people talk about self-love, I mentioned this on the show before, but I think that that's a really difficult thing to put into practice because it just seems like, well, duh, obviously I love myself. It's almost like a protective shell that you put. So what are some ways that you feel like you've pushed yourself to grow and figure out that you don't love yourself and you should love yourself more?
Right, totally. Well, yeah, I just want to mention I have such vivid memories of being like 25, sitting on the couch with my best friend, and we're just crying our eyes out. We're like, we want to love ourselves, but we don't know what that means. Like, we don't know what that feels like. We have no idea. We get the concept. We know that it exists, but it is just so foreign to us. So for me, it actually came a couple years ago. I went through a really bad breakup. And honestly, I'll say it, I've spoken about it at PorcFest. I had to go to therapy. I needed help. I needed help processing things. And I'll never forget the first thing my therapist said to me was, okay, we got to work on some self-compassion, because there was such judgment of my vulnerability. There was such judgment of the mistakes I made, of my shortcomings. Then I was judging the fact that I didn't love myself. Like I did not have an ounce of it. And so it became this practice of one, being able to recognize the difficult emotions, being to recognize the self-judgment and be present with it. And then also cultivate this kindness to myself that you would give a friend. I mentioned in my speech, like we would very seldom, if not never, talk to our friends the way we talk to ourselves. So our inner voice can be very harsh. It can be very judgmental. And that's very much conditioned by the culture, I think, and obviously by how we're raised and how we grow up. So if you don't have the money for therapy, I certainly don't anymore. After I got censored from the internet with anti-media, I have a great workbook I've been using. It has helped me so much. It's called the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. It's by Kristen Neff. She's, I think, a psychologist, a meditation teacher, and it really breaks down the practice of learning to be kind to yourself, of learning to feel your feelings. And it's that's made the difference, because I found that when I was seeking this external validation, whether, whatever I was doing in my life to run away from my emotions, it was running away from the emotions that really prevented me from healing, because you can't ignore difficult emotions. They're just going to rear their head in other ways, which was me making a video with my boobs hanging out. It was me acting horribly in relationships. It manifests as all these different things. But to me, it's fundamentally a lack of self-love. And I see that with people who are busy demonizing women, calling us all stupid. It's like, well, if that's how you're viewing other people, chances are you're not really able to give that compassion to yourself either.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Carey. I love that. And I just want to second the workbook by Kristen Neff. Definitely helpful. And, there's lots of different ways to learn about self-love or to go on a journey. It's probably going to be a little bit different for everybody. And it depends on your personal flavor of how you haven't been loving yourself, right? It's definitely really important to explore that because, yeah, it's true. So often our judgments of other people are really like so much about what we don't like about ourselves. And it affects your life in so many different ways when you have self-judgments. And I just think it's great that we're talking about this. I hope everybody goes on that journey themselves. And sometimes you need a professional, like a therapist, like you said.
No, I was going to third that. I think that, I think we also tend to judge ourselves, not just on our looks, but on our accomplishments and things we think we should have done or haven't done. And I think if we can really sit back and learn about ourselves and learn about what makes us happy, it takes time. It's not something that if you haven't ever done it, you're not just going to sit down and be like, well, I like TV. Like really what makes you happy, what doesn't make you happy. I know I had a very easy childhood and adolescence, really supportive, loving parents and siblings. And I was somewhat of a late bloomer physically. I was just like a cute kid who looked 13 until I was probably 24, 22. Mm-hmm. And when I finally came into myself, suddenly I was always very confident in who I was and my skills and my personality. And suddenly I was being appreciated for my looks and I didn't know how to handle it. It was very confusing to me because I had been raised by my parents to believe that I'm smart and funny and creative and all the things that they love about me. And suddenly there's this cultural like, oh, wow, well, she's hot now. She doesn't look like a little kid anymore. And it was really, really, really confusing to me. And I made a lot of terrible choices in dating and in love. And when I sat down and really thought about the things that made me happy, it wasn't people liking the way I looked or not liking the way I looked. It was appreciating and understanding the fact that I'm an introvert or that sometimes I like to be goofy around the house and not judging that in myself, if that makes sense. Like there are a lot of things that our culture and our society really rewards. And I think physical attractiveness, I think definitely extroversion. This is a whole conversation for another day, but there are certain things that we really think are good and make you a good person. And sometimes we strive for those things and they're just not us. And I think really understanding what makes us us and what makes us tick and perform in a way that makes us happy is really key. And it takes a long time. I mean, it took me until my 30s easily.
Yeah. So knowing yourself is part of loving yourself, right?
Really?
Developing that self-knowledge.
Sure.
And yeah, I really like what you said, Lauren. I think most of us are our own worst critic, right? We put so much pressure on ourselves to be what we hear from culture or from other people that we should be, but we never stop to think about what we want for ourselves. What kind of life do we want to have? What do we want to be? And that's part of freedom. And I think that really ties in nicely to your talk, Carey. You were kind of saying that, like, if you're stuck in these judgments and if you're living in this world of blaming women for all your problems, that's really no different than kind of blaming the government for all your problems or blaming other things outside of yourself that you have no control over for all of your problems. Not taking any responsibility for what you can do in your own life to make your life better and to make it more fulfilling for you. And that's not freedom, living in that place of blaming someone else and taking no responsibility, right?
Right, exactly. And it's a state of reactivity. Like if you can't forgive someone, if you're blaming someone, if you're resentful, well, then you're not really free. And this is, I'm sort of repeating what I've learned from this meditation teacher and former therapist named Tara Brach. She's awesome. It's BRACH. I do a lot of her meditations and talks. And it's true. It's like if I think back on when I first started making these videos, I was so angry. And granted, I understand the anger. There's a lot to be angry about. But if you're stuck in that, and if that becomes the foundation of why you want a free world, then that just sounds so backwards to me. I mean, Ron Paul, I saw him, I mean, I've seen him speak many times now, but at one speech he was saying, actually, the person I was with at the time asked him, like, he was working in, I think the Liberty, it was something within the Republican Party, but Libertarians trying to be part of the Republican Party. It was years ago. He's since abandoned the project, but he was asking, he was like, it's really miserable. People are so mean. They're so hateful. And Ron Paul basically said, if you're not having fun, don't do it. Like, freedom is fun. It's not supposed to be a weight. It's supposed to be something that's liberating. And if you find yourself stuck and mad and angry all the time, then you're not free. You can be free from statism. You can be free from believing in government. But if emotionally you're still so stuck on these really suffocating emotions, in my opinion, then you're not really living freedom. And I'm not saying it's wrong or bad. I mean, we all struggle with this, but I think it's maybe something to bring some attention to.
I noticed that you didn't call out some of the creeps by name, and yet afterward, there continue to be creepy people that are hitting you up as if they hadn't heard the message at all. So I'd like to offer some practical tips for people. When meeting people, don't always offer a hug. Read the room and see if that person really wants a hug, because I don't always want a hug. Another thing is, like, if you remember that person and they don't remember you, don't quiz them about it over and over again.
Oh, no.
Because that's just a little bit like, it makes you feel bad because you want to remember everybody. Those are my 2 rules. Please don't try and hug me unless I look like I really want a hug. And that should be a general rule for a lot of people, because you gave this talk and you're like, hey guys, maybe you shouldn't message my inbox constantly when I don't want to write you back and I never write you back. And then that person just starts writing you and stuff. And then, like, I don't know, sometimes people are inappropriate physically and you got to tell them no. So guys, if you're listening to this and you think I would never do that, maybe you have and you just haven't noticed.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Tatiana. I think that...
Sorry to interject with some, like, reality. I know we're talking about self-love, but don't love yourself so much that you're forcing me to give you a heart-to-heart hug, okay? This happened to me. Some guy's like, can I have a hug? I'm like, I guess. And then he's like, oh no, well, how about now heart to heart, which means like my breast to his breast. Like, I don't want to hug you, bro. What the hell is that about?
Yeah. And that made you, and that you felt uncomfortable when that happened.
Yeah. So, like, okay, don't feel like you have to sexualize yourself, but don't feel like you have to take every hug from every creepo that wants to give you one. Sometimes a hug is warranted. Sometimes it's just gross. Like if you haven't been showering or wearing deodorant, and if you've been in a warm environment, then that might be a good time to go with a hand high five, a fist bump.
Right. And I think there's room for both. Like, I think there's space to be like, oh, okay, this person is really looking for human connection and, you know, they want to feel validated. They want to feel seen. But at the same time, it's okay for me to set a boundary. Like, it's not necessarily my obligation to fulfill this need for them. Like, I can empathize with it. I can understand it. I can really try to be conscious of me being reactive to it, but I also don't have to have them. And I also don't have to respond to all their messages, because that makes me very uncomfortable, and I don't need to sacrifice my own feeling of safety and security in order to please somebody else.
But see, this is us being nice, right? Like, this is sort of a little bit of the woman's condition too. Well, I don't want to be mean. I don't want to hurt their feelings. But now you're holding a bunch of sweaty men, and you might not want to. It's not the kind of sweaty man I had in mind.
Right. And I think it's just a matter of learning, like, if somebody has the emotional intelligence to at least ask, like, hey, can I give you a hug? Maybe I could try saying, you know what, I don't think so. Thank you. I appreciate the offer, but I'm good. Which is hard for me. It's hard to have boundaries.
Yeah, it can be hard to have boundaries, especially when a lot of us as kids, these messages start really early where we hear, okay, give grandma a hug. Okay, well, what if we don't want to give grandma a hug? Say
so
thank
true.
you. What if we don't feel grateful, right?
Right.
Say you're sorry. What if we don't feel sorry? It's like just this robotic programmed response, and we get conditioned to kind of tune out to how we're really feeling, and that teaches us that how we're feeling doesn't really matter. And I think every kid gets those messages, boys, girls, and everyone else. But, you know, as women, when we grow up and we become seen as sexual creatures, this shows up a lot when we get, you know, offered dates and touches and conversations that we might not actually want. But in order to set those boundaries, we have to be in touch with what we do want. And then we have to be willing to express our preferences and to say no. And that can be a challenge because sometimes we learn that saying no isn't safe because we get a really negative reaction when we say no. Someone might get angry, or they might say, you hurt my feelings and you're responsible for my feelings. And we get that message too, that we're responsible for other people's feelings. And so that we want to be nice and we want to be a good girl and make sure that everyone else is happy. And we think that it's our responsibility, but it's not. Everyone is responsible for their own feelings. And that's a really important thing that we need to learn as part of being adults. In a situation where there's two people and one of them says, hey, can I give you a hug? And the other person is thinking, well, I don't really want to hug them. There's responsibility that needs to be taken on both sides of that, I think. The person who's being offered the hug can take responsibility for checking in with themselves and thinking, do I really want to give this hug? Am I really willing to give this hug? And if the answer is no, they need to say, no, thank you. I'm not up for that right now. Or, yeah, not right now. or no, you can't have a hug. And then walking away. But there's also responsibility that needs to be taken on the part of the person who's offering the hug. And I think the responsibility for them is to reflect, to say, is this question really gonna create an environment where she feels safe? Like, am I doing everything I can to make myself a person who is easy to hug, or a person who she want to hug, right? And how does she feel about this, right? It's not just about how do I feel, which is I want to give this person a hug. It's not just about how do I feel, but it's about considering how the other person might feel as well. And I think that's what's often missing.
Wait, this is a critical point. If the person looks like they're recoiling in horror when you try to touch them, this is generally a sign that they don't need a hug. I mean, all right, here's something I've been like bottling up while you're talking. I'm like, I gotta, so sometimes men hear that I'm single, right? And I'm glad that they think I'm attractive and they would date me. That's very flattering. But there's also this assumption that because I'm single and they have a wiener, that I'm supposed to be like, oh my Lord, it's here. Like, I'm ready for the penis. Like, I'm not ready for the penis. And I don't really want to be like, I don't know, like, again, read the room. Does the person show an interest in you in a romantic sense, like when you keep touching them over and over again? Because I have a hard time even figuring out if I like somebody if they're too much in my space. Like, I need a little bit of space with that. And then I also feel guilted into people's random things. And then I think one of these days I'm just going to be really mean because sometimes guys don't pick up the hint. Maybe I sound a little bit like a bee or something, but I don't know.
No, not at all. I mean,
much, like, stop following me around. I'm just trying to hang out with my friends and be, the life of the party. And then I have like some random people that'll glom on, and I don't know, just read the room, people. Can you tell if I'm trying to avoid you? If I am, then don't hang out.
Yeah, that's the point we're trying to make, Tatiana. I mean, I think you're not a bitch for having preferences and things that you want, right? That you don't want to hug from certain people or from anyone right then or whatever. It's the responsibility is not all on you to say no and then to feel guilty about it or whatever. The responsibility is also on the other people to read the room, right? To have some self-awareness.
Get with it, guys. Come on.
That's a part of that self-awareness.
Like, I feel like I would be bad at poker because my face kind of shows my feelings. If my face is like contorted in a grimace, that's not a good sign.
Yeah, and like, you'd be surprised. So like, and I'm so grateful to have support. I'm so grateful that there are people who want to talk to me. There are people who want to come up to me and like thank me for my content. But there comes a point in the conversation where, like, if a girl is like constantly looking away from you and breaking eye contact, if her arms are crossed, if she's turning her body away from you, maybe that's a good sign that you have overstayed your welcome. And that doesn't mean you're wrong for wanting to talk to her, but just being perceptive to these things can be very helpful.
Is there a counter to this though? Because here we are, we're almost kind of giving guys like, don't be a creep, but admit it, sometimes a hot guy being a creep is a very different experience than a guy that you're not attracted to. So are there lines that a man should do if he wants to play the more aggressive card? Maybe some women like a little bit more aggression. Is there any comment on that? Or no?
That's a great question. And it's something that I haven't figured out because I do think that is difficult. It's like, well, if we're attracted to the guy who's not a creep, but if we're not down, like, oh, yikes, get away. And I don't necessarily know how to reconcile that other than to know just how to set my own boundaries. Like, the average guy, if you are clear with them, they will get the hint. If you're like, hey, no, thank you, fine. Okay. But I think it can be confusing because as we're talking about, we don't always know how to set boundaries. We are conditioned to be people pleasers. We don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. So I think that comes down to, again, being conscious of ourselves, of going inward, of having the self-love to be able to say like, okay, thank you, but I'm not interested. And there might be a guy who's not okay with that and who gets creepy, and that is not okay. But I think the average guy, the average human being, if you're clear with them and you tell them that you are not interested, I think that, that's okay. And sometimes guys, I don't want to collectivize, in my experience, it can be really helpful to be so explicit and so clear that there is no room for confusion. Because I think as women, we are a little bit more in touch with those little things, with the body language, with the subtle differences in language. Whereas I think a guy really, I've had guys tell me this, they're like, you need to slap me over the head with it. I just need you to be clear with me. So I think that goes a really long way. And to get to that point, I know for me, I had to work on myself to get there.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I think it is just a matter of also really, really being clear. And I immediately wanted to say, without being a bitch. Like, you can be a bitch if you want to be a bitch.
Yeah. Is
like,
it being a bitch, or is it just having preferences and expressing them?
Exactly. I know that when I first was single at 30 and I'd been with somebody for 10 years, I had no idea how to be single. And so for me, it was easier when I got hit on and I wasn't interested, or even when I was but wasn't ready, I would default back then and be like, I have a boyfriend, even if I didn't. And that's so messed up. Like, you shouldn't have to have an excuse that's not real to tell somebody you're not interested. It's scary. It takes time to get there, but I totally agree with Carey that you have to be firm, and just sometimes women and men need to be kind of hit over the head with it exactly in that way. Like, no, I'm not interested in you. Have a great day. It's really not that rude when you're just telling them straight up, I think. I don't know. Maybe other people think that's rude. I think that's just better for everybody. I think in life, that's a better mentality to have with jobs, with people you're dating, with friends, like, not to be scared to say no, and not to always feel like we have to give an excuse of why we're saying no. Sometimes it's just no. That's it.
Absolutely. Sometimes it's just no.
Yeah, that's it.
That's what this episode is here to tell you. No.
So how can someone, if they're having trouble hearing no, what can someone do about that? And if they're having trouble saying no, I have some ideas, but I want to hear from you ladies too.
You have to be really brutal. That's my instinct. You have to be mean. I don't really want to be mean, but I think if somebody is being aggressive and messing with you, you got to punch them in the nose. Like the big bully, like sometimes you got to lay down the law with these dudes.
I agree.
And actually punch them in the nose, but maybe if you have to, but like with your words, you want to crush them, and then make sure that you have a way to get home where you're not alone, where they could kill you on the way back.
Be safe. Well, we talked about this on another episode too, and Stephanie and I both have seen this with you. You have a really good ability to say no. It's comfortable for you. So what about people who maybe still have that ultimate, which I sometimes get, the people pleasing? You've called me a mama bear before. I sometimes have those tendencies where I want to nurture instead of, be harsh. What do you think brings that out in you that you can just kind of teach some of us who are maybe a little bit more nervous to?
You have to spend time with my mother. She's the biggest bitch I know.
So having role models, right? So having someone to look up to who's really good at saying no, I think that's actually a great tip. Let's break it down into
sanitize that real well. No, like, you need somebody who knows how to be a bee in your life, and just watch them in action and just impersonate them and embody the anger and the fury that they hold within that allows them to be mad. You have to cultivate your it's a little bit like the Jordan Peterson thing where he says that you have that monster within you and you have to kind of keep it under wraps unless it's absolutely necessary. You, as a woman, I think you need to cultivate that inner bee, because sometimes you need to whip it out and like beat people with it, because that's your weapon. You have to be strong with your words if you can. I mean, you can't always be, and I don't really relish in combat because it seems really scary, but if I'm going to do it, I'm going to go in there and try and be as aggressive as possible. So I don't know, just hang out with somebody who's really mean, or watch like Absolutely Fabulous. They're very
they're the best.
irreverent. Yeah, they're very irreverent and sort of, those are like bitches for beginners.
Well, and I think it's also
beginners. I love that.
It's awesome. But I think I've also learned it takes a lot of experiences too to be able to say no in a bitchy way or in a non-bitchy way, and have enough people not freak out about it. I know that once I started saying no to things, even minor things, and I wasn't scared about whether people were going to not like me anymore, I was like, oh, well, no, that's easy. Yeah. I don't want to do it. No, cool. And people didn't freak out, and nobody, like, I don't know. It's interesting. I think it's also nature versus nurture and all that too, because both my parents are pretty strong. I mean, my mom's a teacher, my dad's Israeli. Like, they're pretty
that's all you need to say. Nothing.
Like, you know, they're not like meek, timid kind of people, but I still kind of have that inside me, and I've tried to bypass it, and I think I've done pretty well over the years. But yeah, there's still that little voice inside me like, oh, I don't want to hurt their feelings, or oh, are they going to be mad if I say no? And I have to just override it every time I say no. But it's hard sometimes. I don't know what like gets, besides having like a massive B in your life. What do you guys think is a good way? Like, for instance, Carey, somebody coming into the movement, like a newbie like me, coming into the movement and maybe dealing with a bunch of jerks. Maybe the first people that they are involved with.
There's not that many jerks, just to be fair. There's only a few noisy, disgusting ones that ruin it for everybody. Most of the guys are nice, but they should white knight. Sorry, carry on.
So I have a suggestion for that. But
yeah, because let's say you don't know, and let's say I've met some amazing people in the whole movement because of you, Tatiana. I've met great guys. But let's say it's somebody completely without any ties, and they just, the first thing they stumble on is kind of somebody saying women are stupid or too emotional, or how do you bypass that?
Carey, you go ahead first, and then I'm going to jump in afterwards.
Oh, well, I mean, I guess for me, I'm trying to think, I don't know. I was raised in a very loving household that despite the divorce, despite the trauma, I never got the sense of like, you're a girl, so you can't do this. I mean, I never got that message. It was just like, you can do whatever you want. You're an amazing human being. So I think that's a good foundation, but I understand not everybody has that. I mean, I think it does help to just not collectivize people. It can be really creepy though. And I just want to share one experience that I mentioned. I didn't give the full story during my speech, but there was someone who last year that I'd known for a while professionally and on a friendship level, a guy, and he asked me for something very inappropriate in exchange for professional help. And I realized it was on a Saturday, and I realized that whole conversation, I was trying to laugh it off. I was trying to make him feel comfortable, and I felt really awful about it for the next couple of days. And that Monday, to his credit, he messaged me to apologize, and I realized boundary. No, what you did is not okay. Okay, dude, I understand whatever you have going on, but that is a line you cannot cross with me. So I think it really does, even if it's scary, even if it's uncomfortable, to just assert yourself. It's okay to do that. And also just to know that like the vast majority of men in this movement aren't like that. They might have their issues just like everybody else, including me, but the average man, again, like if you just tell them no, they're going to stop. And to the credit of the internet and the online community, most guys, even if they message me something creepy, the max they'll do it is 2 or 3 times. And if they don't hear from me, they walk away. And I know that that's not very comforting. Like, well, hey, most of them.
Yeah, you still have to deal with it 2 to 3 times before they take it.
Exactly. But I mean, I had another instance where there was someone who he had pledged a lot of money to me on Patreon, but was very weird with me, like backhanded compliments, like insulting, to the point where it was really hard for me. But I messaged him and I said, hey, just so you know, I know that you mean well. You know, there's like this acknowledgement of like, hey, even if, whatever their intentions, it's nice to just let them feel heard. Of like, hey, I understand that you're not trying to make me uncomfortable. I know that's not the intention, but for myself, I'm not comfortable with this situation. I'm not comfortable with this interaction. So I hope you can understand that I won't be participating anymore. No ill will. You know, we don't have to be malicious. You don't have to be angry. You can if you want. For me, I'd rather not do that. I'd rather try to help the person feel a little less called out personally. And for me, it's worked. That guy never messaged me again. He never tried to contact me again. And so, and it felt really good. You know, I could have been mean, and it would have been just as empowering. There's no one way to do it, but I think it really just comes down again to knowing what makes you uncomfortable and setting that boundary for yourself.
I think that's a great tip. I love that.
Just say no, ladies.
Yeah, just say no.
Well,
Stephanie?
it can be not as simple as just say no, because what I was going to say, and I love your tips, Carey, and I love all of your tips, ladies. I appreciate this. Have an unapologetic bitch role model in your life that you can look up to. And, you know, also just do it, I guess, and know that things are going to be okay. Like you said, Carey, I think that saying no is a skill that needs to be practiced and learned, because what we've been practicing for most of our lives is saying no to ourselves and yes to other people, especially if we have problems with kind of people pleasing. We've been really saying yes to other people, but saying no to ourselves. And the first step is kind of realizing when that happens, right? When you say yes to someone else's request, what are you actually saying no to? It's like, to put it in economic terms, it's like the seen and the unseen, right? There's this essay by Frederick Bastiat, this famous economist, where he's talking about the seen and the unseen. And it's always, people always focus more on what they can see rather than the unseen costs or the unseen consequences of something that they do. So yeah, think about the unseen and think about what you're saying no to with yourself when you say yes to someone else. And practicing saying no. Okay, so most of our lives, we've been practicing saying yes to what other people want us to do. And this is probably very important for us when we're children, because we need to please our caregivers because we depend on them for survival. We don't want them to kick us out on the street or something like that, or stop loving us or stop taking care of us. So we learn to please them. But then when we're adults, that doesn't serve us so well anymore, because we don't need to depend on anyone else. We can take care of ourselves. We can be a lot stronger about our preferences. And so practicing saying no. I did this exercise once where it was at a retreat and I was in a group of people and everyone was just in a circle around me and they were saying, would you like to do XYZ? Would you like to eat a piece of chocolate cake right now? Would you like to go swimming with me? Would you like to go on a date with me? Would you like to hold my hand? And I was just practicing saying no to each one of those requests.
Wow.
And I wasn't just saying no. I was saying, well, thank you for the offer, but right now I don't feel like it, so I'm going to say no. One person asked me, can I use your toothbrush? And I thought that was so funny. And like they knew I was going to say no to everything. It was just a chance for me to practice. And then some of them were enticing offers, like things that I wanted to say yes to. Someone asked me, would you like to climb the mountain with me or something like that? And I was saying, ordinarily, I would love to say yes to this request. But right now I'm doing an exercise where I practice saying no. And to keep with integrity, I'm going to say no.
Wow.
So this was an awesome exercise, just to say no in a completely safe context where nothing bad's going to happen if I say no. It's just literally practice. And then you have sort of a bank of no's that you can draw on next time you need to say no in a real life situation. And then it's just practice. It's like a skill that can be practiced and developed. It's like a muscle. You need to strengthen your no muscle by practicing this over and over again.
So I feel like we've been doing this show for a little while now, and there's all these different ideas for what people can do. I think that in practical terms, listeners can try and set aside maybe between 10 and 30 minutes for themselves in the morning, where I think some assignments would include saying no, right, to yourself in the mirror if you don't want to do something, if that's something you feel like you need to. Also, positive affirmations and meditation. So far, those seem to be like the good things that we could put into practice. And that would be easy to do if you just invest a little bit of time in yourself, which is the biggest proof of love that you can show.
Oh, yeah. I love that, Tatiana. And I think I want to add something to that, because these are mostly homework or exercises for probably mostly women who are going to be wanting to do those kinds of exercises. But on the other side, I would really like it if maybe some of the men out there or some of the people on the other side of the spectrum who don't really have trouble saying no, but they might have trouble hearing no gracefully. I would like for those folks to practice hearing no. And the ways you can do that are, just to maybe bring a little bit more awareness to what another person might be feeling, and think about, if you ask someone for something, why might they feel pressured to say yes when they don't really mean it? Is there anything going on in the situation where it's not really okay for them to say no, or that they might be afraid that if they say no, something bad is going to happen to them. It can be a great exercise to think about that.
That's
for example,
interesting.
yeah, right. For example, something like that might be if you are somebody's boss and you ask your employee for a hug, and like, is it really, yeah, it's inappropriate, right? But is that really okay? Are they really going to feel okay saying no if that's what they mean? Well, maybe not, because they might be afraid that they'll get fired or they'll have other negative consequences. Same thing like if you ask someone, hey, can I have a hug? And you know that person maybe experienced some kind of abuse in their past. Maybe they had an abusive ex-husband, or they had abuse from their parents or something like that. Maybe that person is going to be less likely to say no when they really mean no, because in the past it was dangerous for them. And it has nothing to do with you asking them for a hug in this moment, but be aware that can sometimes be going on in someone's history and in someone's inner workings. And it may have nothing to do with you, again. So that means that you don't have to take it personally when someone says no to a hug, because it really might have, it might not be about you at all. It might be all about whatever's going on for them, or whatever happened in their past. And you can say, actually, thank you for speaking up honestly about your preferences. Thank you for being honest about what you want, because I really don't want to pressure you to do something that you don't want to do. And you can hear their no and just say thank you, basically, or at least embody that sentiment of gratitude.
That's so beautiful. I love that. Just not taking things personally and understanding, like, even when people are creepy with me, it's been so helpful for me to just recognize, like, okay, they're not inherently wrong or bad. Maybe they're just really suffering. That doesn't mean I have to engage in the behavior, but it takes some of the reactivity off of me. And I really love that. And as you're saying that, I'm just having these internal thoughts. I just wanted to comment. It's funny because we're having this conversation for women. I'm loving having this conversation, but there's this little voice in me of like, oh God, are men going to feel like we're just attacking them and like we're just demonizing them? And is this an okay conversation to have? Which, you know, it's not surprising that I'm having this reaction, but I just want to say, you know, talking about these things, talking about ways to, you know, maybe be more respectful, I think can be viewed as, you know, just demonizing men, you know, toxic masculinity, you know, and we're just shutting men down and we're emasculating them. But from my perspective, I love masculinity. I love men, and I love feeling safe around men. I love feeling protected around men. And I think that being conscious of these things, we're not trying to like belittle your masculinity. Like, I want more of your masculinity, just in a safe way, like not the toxic kind. I'm not saying that masculinity is toxic. I think that's kind of like a way that the conversation gets skewed, is the people who oppose the conversation are like, well, you're just saying masculinity is toxic. No, I don't think that's true. I think masculinity can be very divine and sacred. I just think there are certain kinds of it that can be toxic. And I think bringing this awareness, bringing this sensitivity is, you know, granted, I'm not a man, I can't speak for men, but from a feminine perspective, I think it's a great way to be more masculine. I love that. I love masculinity. It's not about demeaning it. It's about feeling safe with true masculinity.
Yes, men are going to hear this show and think that we are belittling and demeaning them. And to those men, I would say, okay, you don't have to take this personally. If you're doing your job and you're gracefully accepting no's when you hear them, and that includes even soft no's when someone's saying, I'm not really sure, I don't think so, maybe, but they're kind of afraid to say no. If you're really doing your job at genuinely hearing other people's no's, then we're not saying anything negative against you. We're not talking to you, basically, right? So you don't need to take it personally. We're not just talking about men, we're talking about behaviors that are, troublesome, or that make it harder for people to get along in this society, in this world, right? So yeah, you don't have to take it personally. And if you do take it personally, if you do hear something like this and it feels really like a personal attack, why is that? Think about that a little bit. You know, maybe you'll come to maybe reflecting on it would be helpful.
You're so diplomatic, Stephanie. I admire it. You're like, if you find yourself being a creep, then maybe ask yourself, why do you keep creeping? Keep creeping.
Oh, that's a great summary. Yes, ask yourself. It's always good to ask yourself and reflect, right?
Yeah, don't be a creeper, and love yourself more, and then, you know, you'll find a great girl, because we're looking for nice guys.
Yeah, and I think that we could say the same for women. It's like, if I find myself constantly reacting, constantly blaming, like, oh, this guy did that and that guy did this, well, what's going on with me? Like, maybe I can check in with myself too, because I am happy to admit I have had so many episodes of just going off like a crazy person. And I know everybody does, like man, woman, but like maybe those were opportunities for me to pause and reflect and sit with my feelings before going out into the world with them.
Wow, I feel like that requires a lot of self-control. But I like balancing this. I feel like this whole show is us just crapping on dudes. And I'd like to say that as a woman, I have been crazy, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry, world. It happened before and it'll happen again.
I guarantee I've been crazy, but I'm not sorry about it.
Oh my God. Sorry, not sorry. All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Where can people find you, Carey?
You can find me, I'm banned from Twitter actually, so you cannot find me there, but you can find me on YouTube, Carey Wedler. I assume the spelling will be in the description of this podcast. It's a very confusing spelling. I mean, it's very phonetic, but people, there's like a million ways to spell Carey, but C-A-R-E-Y. You can find me on Instagram, you can find me on YouTube, you can find me on Facebook. And that's about it for now.
Very cool. Thank you very much to our sponsor, MetalPay. Check them out. Use the code Tatiana Show and you get $10 just for signing up. And it's easier than Venmo and PayPal, but more crypto-y. Anything else, everybody? Go to proofoflovecast.com. Send us your questions. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Proof of Lovecast. That is the site. That is the stuff. Check in with us next time. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks for having me.
Show me your heart. I know that it's beating. Tell me that you love me too. So I know your heart is true. 'Cause I need some proof of love. 'Cause I need some proof of love. 'Cause I need some proof of love. Thank you for listening to Proof of Love. Please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Proof of Lovecast. More episodes can be found at proofoflovecast.com. And make sure you leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends. Proof of Love has been brought to you by CryptoMediaHub.com, a boutique marketing and PR agency for Bitcoin and beyond.